Welcome to the Mind Theory Podcast. I'm Akanksh.
And this is Avinash.
And we're here to demystify psychology. So, Avinash, what are we demystifying today?
So today we're going to be demystifying gamers. And this episode of the Mind Theory Podcast, we're talking about gaming, the gaming industry, and how gaming and then intersectionality with psychology.
Yeah, we'll be addressing a lot of interesting topics related to gaming. And hopefully you all enjoy. So, Avinash, do you play a lot of video games in like your free time?
A lot. Okay, that's an interesting question. I think especially I was a huge gamer back in high school, but in college it sort of dipped a little bit. But now with the pandemic, I think gaming, especially for me, has been one of the only places where I've been like interacted with my friends that is not just assignments. So yeah, it has been a huge part, especially for the last like 6 or so months. What about you?
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, I've been playing video games since I was like in, I guess, third grade. I played all of the earlier games, Max Payne and the OG Counter-Strike. You remember that 1.6?
1.6, yeah.
Yeah. That was the golden days. And I mean, I do play now as well, but not as regularly as I'd want to. Just no time. I mean, if I did have time, I'd play.
Yeah, college really gets in the way, doesn't it?
Yeah. And it's actually kind of funny because usually I'm playing video games and listening to a podcast, and here I am on a podcast talking about video games.
Wow, very topical, very...
Yeah. So, how has your experience of video games in the pandemic been? You said you were talking about how you connect with your friends, right? How's that been?
Yeah, so at least in the beginning months, I feel like I sort of went in this like bubble of my own where I wasn't really interacting with anyone else mostly other than like when me and my friends from college collaborated on like assignments and stuff. So, like, in the later months, after a couple of months when, like, the dust of the pandemic and the shock value, I guess, started to settle down, a lot of us got into this routine. So, we made this Discord server for our course, and, like, we got a bunch of people who we didn't know were interested in gaming. And all of us, we got together and we started playing a lot of games. For me, the couple of big ones have been Valorant, which is this first-person shooter.
Mm-hmm.
And the second one, and I think this one popped off big time in the pandemic, which is Among Us.
Yeah. Actually, it's kind of cool that I feel like I have my own kind of idea of why people are like resorting to gaming right now. I think has to do more with like people can interact, sure, like on a Google Meet call, like a group call, but like people want to be doing something as like a common ground for interaction. So I think video games are exactly that, especially like games like Among Us that are, the perfect sort of interactive game. And I think that's why it took off.
I think in like the entire branch of party games itself, I feel like Among Us sort of came in at the perfect moment. But I think as you talked about, I think the one stale topic during the pandemic became how's your lockdown going? I think people got bored of that real quick. So when we as humans are interacting and all those things, I feel like Among Us as a game sort of becomes a thing we can talk about. And like by that medium, we're also fostering other relationships. We are like knowing, I mean, Among Us maybe is like not the best example of trust, but at the same time, it gives you something to talk about. And that's, I think, one of the biggest things. Specifically.
Yeah, funnily enough, like the same thing happened with my class. I mean, I'm in first year, so all of my classmates are like, I don't know any of them. And we also started a Discord server and we play Among Us like all the time. And that's the way we've actually come to bond with each other.
Exactly. And I think a lot of the juniors are on my Discord server. And that's how I've gotten to know a lot of them. Because other than that, like, we would have no way of interacting with them. But now, like, I'm like pretty good friends with half of my juniors. So that's it. It's interesting how even though we don't have like the medium of face-to-face interaction, very swiftly and very organically, I feel like Among Us has sort of taken, maybe not Among Us, but gaming as a facet in general has sort of taken that center stage where people find it acceptable to talk and interact.
Yeah, I think that's why WHO also launched this campaign, right? Play a part together.
Yeah.
Yeah, in collaboration with like a lot of YouTubers as well as like Twitch and stuff.
Yeah, and I think they got a lot of like gaming companies themselves, a lot of gaming devs, like all the mainstream ones, like Riot,
Blizzard is
Blizzard's there, Riot's there. So basically, the WHO presented gaming as like a suitable coping mechanism to deal with all of the different problems we've been facing with the pandemic. And one of the biggest things is physical distancing should not result in emotional distancing. And that was one of the biggest facets of the Play Stay Apart Together campaign.
Yeah. Actually, I'm pretty surprised as to how things have taken a U-turn for gamers. Because, I mean, like, about like 4 years ago when GTA 5 came out, there was like this whole controversy that gaming has no benefits. Like, the mainstream media was propagating this narrative that video games, make you violent, and they actually do not help you in any sort of way. And I think now that people have, come to be living in isolation, we begin to realize that actually, I mean, gaming's not that bad. It's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, especially, I think if you like sort of look at it in context, that time is also the sort of time where there were a lot of mass shootings, especially in the West. And I feel like a lot of media and like the scientific community in general sort of wanted to like point fingers at something like, okay, this is why this is happening. And that probably led to a lot of, like, especially if you look at it from a sort of intuitive standpoint, and according to Bandura's social cognitive theory as well, we can sort of make this conclusion that violent video games can initiate the observational learning in adolescents especially. So they might imitate the aggressive behavior, but at the same time, and maybe more importantly, it normalized their understanding and acceptability of aggressive behavior as a facet of video games.
Okay, so I was just going to like buttress whatever you said, because the earlier theories of video game and aggression, it started off because in the 70s and 80s, like media violence, like violence portrayed on media was kind of like associated with the violence in real life, like people would kind of imitate it. So that's why there was a lot of research into this, and parallelly, researchers thought that video games would also have a similar effect because it's more of a interactive media than television or whatever. They had these two main theories. One is the social learning theory, like you pointed out, which says that people who play video games basically imitate violence that is done, and it makes them very aggressive and stuff. And there was also the arousal theory, which basically said that video games put you in like a drive state where there's an initial arousal, and there is a point of time where it makes you very aggressive, but then if you play for a longer period of time, it kind of plateaus out. So interestingly, they did this study on these students who played Mortal Kombat for 10 minutes and for 75 minutes. And they saw that there was this initial spike in aggressive thoughts. One thing to note is that these studies never looked at like aggressive behavior, but just aggressive thoughts that were purely self-report. So the validity of it is debatable again.
Yeah, again, the other side of the scientific community on the same topic says that a lot of these effects that are seen like immediately after like the participant engage in violent video games. And so there's an argument to be made that these are just the effects of priming. So priming is a phenomenon in psychology, which is basically when you like, wait, how do you define priming? Can you do that for me?
So, yeah, I mean, priming is basically when there is a sort of a cognitive schema that is initiated in your mind, and it basically stays there until you act it out, and then it gets resolved. So an action is primed until you act it out, and then the priming kind of like it's resolved. So there was a lot of research on this as well, where video games supposedly prime aggressive behavior, and these primed individuals, until they act out, they will have the aggressive tendencies.
Yeah, and another study, I think this study sort of took it as like a more it basically seeked out to find a more real world significance to the entire problem, because a lot of the critique of the anti-gaming side was that these researchers don't have any real world implications. So what they did was they had volunteers play 3 games. No, wait. They had volunteers play 2 games, which were a violent video game that was Grand Theft Auto 5, and then non-violent video games that was The Sims 3. So yeah, so they had these players play these games consistently over a period of 2 months, and after that, the results it showed that it was a very very small effect that was like, it showed like a correlation of 0.08, an effect size of 0.08, which is apparently like really small. A rule of thumb in psychological research is that effects below 0.1 are considered trivial.
Okay. And another issue with conducting research related to this is, especially there's this a new idea called the catharsis model for aggression in video games, which basically says that individuals who are frustrated and maybe have aggressive tendencies can actually find catharsis in video games. The problem with this kind of research is that you can't provoke interpersonal violence. So a person has to be in a violent state in order to be able to measure the effect that video game would have on their aggressive behavior. So a researcher can't really provoke interpersonal violence because it's an ethical problem, right? However, like there, as you said, right, a similar study was also conducted. There is this in recent research today. There is this, 2 new models that have been proposed. One is the general aggression model, which states that basically like viewing violent media causes the formation of these cognitive scripts, right? So these scripts get activated in potentially hostile or like ambiguous situations, and more exposure you have to these sort of aggressive things, more aggressive scripts are formed. So they propose this idea for video games as well. But again, they did the same kind of a study where people got to choose violent or non-violent video games. And there was barely any difference in aggressive tendencies. They used the TCRTT, which is the Taylor's Comparative Reaction Time Test measure for aggression. And it didn't really show anything at all. And the second, sort of a prominent idea now, which I personally think is actually makes a lot of sense, is the catalyst model, which basically considers the genetic, the social factors, and says that, some individuals just tend to be violent because of these factors. For instance, this one study looked at, I think it was familial violence and hostile living environments, and their impact on violence. And these individuals were divided into gamers and non-gamers, and both had the similar aggressive tendencies, except the difference was that gamers use stylistic modeling. So basically they would act out aggression in the way that they saw in the video games. But bear in mind that both these groups were aggressive. So if any effect it has is this stylistic modeling, according to this research.
And there's another aspect of like this entire contention that was talked about by Ferguson and colleagues, where he says that a lot of research in aggression and gaming is sort of subject to publication bias, or it's also called the file drawer effect. And basically it says that compared to negative results, research that presents positive results are more likely to be first conducted, and they're more likely to be published as well by journals and stuff. So maybe we're getting like a skewed picture of the entire thing in the first place.
I actually think that, people tend to, there seems to be like a paradigm that exists, right, in science, and people tend not to question that paradigm too hard. Right. Like, see, if you trace the trend of research in video games, you see that initially it was propagated that video games make you aggressive. And a lot of studies tried to just prove that, right, rather than question the thing. And as you said, a bias kind of creeps in, and it causes problems, not just for gamers, but for like the scientific community as a whole.
Yeah.
I think this kind of sparked up during the, those Columbine shootings. That's cool.
Yeah.
So,
especially it's like whenever society as a whole, I think, sees some very like very shocking phenomena that they can't find an answer to, it's very natural for them to be looking at answer and just like looking at answers and maybe just pointing fingers impulsively, just to like maybe find a solution to a problem that maybe isn't as simple to and very deep rooted.
That's definitely true. I actually agree. And I think that definitely aggression, if anything, like a lot of researchers have pointed out, video games are probably like aggression and stuff associated with video games probably has more to do with some other underlying problems, and video game is just maybe a small factor, which is what is observed in a lot of studies as well, like a lot of genetic factors. Like a study showed that individuals who were subjected to bullying tended to be a lot more aggressive and sought out violent media and stuff, like violent video games. So I think,
and maybe this ties into the catharsis theory you talked about as well. Maybe it was like a safe space for them to like sort of indulge in.
That makes sense.
Indulge in their violent tendencies.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's also the aspect of addiction. Now that I mention it, like video game addiction is seen as like a thing. In fact, I think it was added in the DSM-5 as internet gaming disorder.
Oh yeah, let's get into that.
Yeah, and the ICD called it just gaming disorder. So I was kind of like, I was wondering why internet specifically, because like a lot of gamers just tend to stick to like RPGs and stuff. They don't even touch internet games.
So the words maybe like gaming disorder, the idea was first conceptualized in the ICD first in 2013. And that was the first time it was brought up. And even that, it was under the list of topics which were like maybe there could be something there. But again, they needed further research to be a more solidified part of the ICD.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, it's the same is true with DSM as well. It's been termed as an internet gaming disorder, and it's classified under like a behavioral addiction sort of thing, like gambling. So, but I mean, if you look at the list of symptoms, right, it says that there has to be tolerance and withdrawal, evidence for which is pretty much non-existent in terms of video games. Like there was a study, a meta-analysis of 34 studies in the Journal of Clinical Psychology Review. It found that evidence for withdrawal was very, very limited, as well as for tolerance. And the most common sign displayed was irritability. But I mean, irritability does that really count? Of course, I'm going to be irritated, right?
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, also a lot of research shows that a very small subset of individuals actually develop pathological use.
Yeah, and there was this one study that sort of tried to like summarize this entire debate, and I quote, adding video gaming to the list of recognized behavioral addictions could help millions in need. It could also pathologize a normal behavior and create a new stigma.
Right.
Which is, again, I think we see this paradigm against gaming like from like maybe the generation we call the baby boomers, and there it's like, since they did not have it growing up, they see us have it, and it feels like they sort of tend to vilify it from the get-go instead of actually delving in and seeing what it is.
Dude, I actually agree with that, because like if you see, why do you think the mainstream media kind of opposes gaming so much? Because they feel threatened by it. Do you think that there is a significant difference between passionate video gaming and pathology? What do you think are the signs that probably differentiate the two?
No, and yeah, okay, I'd like to talk about this, but also like when gaming disorder was put into the DSM in 2018, there was a bunch of outcry from the gaming community, and I especially remember being that it was a lot of, I think the gaming community sort of acted in impulse and sort of just lashed out and got very defensive, because at least what I see, it's like, it's not, the WHO doesn't aim to go towards people who just play video games for fun. It's especially if you read like the warning signs of gaming disorder, it overtly shows a person who is quote unquote very far gone into that area, right? Because there's definitely people who struggle with this, right? I read a couple of case studies where a person sort of played video games straight for 73 hours. They didn't eat, they drank very little water, they didn't go to the washroom. the moment he got up, he had this like unfiltered flow to his legs, and that sort of led to a sort of like a particular part of their heart expanding, and like they ended up passing away before they got to the emergency room. And there was also another case study where a person who was so involved in gaming, they forgot to feed their pet hamster, and the hamster ended up passing away. So there's definitely people who are very far gone, and they sort of tend to ignore their other responsibilities.
Firstly, poor hamster.
Poor hamster, yeah.
And I mean, yeah, I think I also remember reading about this Twitch streamer who just streamed for like 48 hours or something, and then he died. Because like he just got up and then there was this blood clot and he got a heart attack.
Yeah, so I'll just quote what the ICD says about gaming disorder.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, gaming disorder, it says it's characterized by impaired control over gaming, increasing priority given to gaming over other activities to the extent that gaming takes precedence over other interests and daily activities, and continuation or escalation of gaming despite occurrences of negative consequences.
Right.
So again, I think it very clearly defines that it's a very maladaptive and a sort of...
So professional gamers had an increased grey matter volume in their left cingulate gyrus. So this is a part of the brain that has a lot to do with executive function, like decision making and memory and stuff. So, and this part of the brain was actually showed a lot of improvement, whereas this was not the case for just people who were addicted to video games. They had more of a increase in volume of the left thalamus, which is consistent with a lot of other addictive sort of behavior that is seen.
Yeah, and there was this one study which I actually thought made a lot of sense, which basically talked about gaming addiction doesn't have to do with how often or for how long you play video games. Because it's like sometimes if I don't have work, I'll maybe go for like 4, 5, 6 hours. But thing is, what the study talked about was that your objective of the gaming activity is actually what defines whether it is like maladaptive or it's okay. So even if you play games for a while, and the main thing is you shouldn't be neglecting or letting go of the other facets of your life. And you should, if you're keeping everything together, and even if you're spending a lot of time on gaming, it's not considered maladaptive. Yeah, again, it's like one of the things is the research on this is sort of very skewed as well, because a lot of the literature on gaming and maladaptive coping mechanisms is only geared towards males, and it's only the sample sizes are mostly that of a Western populace.
Right.
So there's a lot of research gaps in there where we don't know how it maybe hits different cultures, it hits different ethnicities, different genders. So there's a lot of research to be done here.
Yeah, I think a lot of people in South Korea, right, they have these gaming centers and stuff. They play a lot of video games.
Yeah, wherever you are, there's always a Korean better than you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, see, there are also like a lot of benefits to playing video games, like a lot, like especially in the domain of like cognitive functions and cognitive faculties. Like for instance, like I came across this one study about task shifting and inhibition of unwanted responses and working memory. So they did this stop signal tasks and an end back task, which is basically like a task that tests whether you can stop yourself from doing a wrong response, and also tests for your reaction time as well as working memory. So they found that all of these like factors across the board, video game players were better at. Their stopping efficiency was better, their working memory was better, and their reaction times were better. I personally, I've played a lot of CSGO, and I think it's actually improved my saccade and smooth pursuit eye movement, and I think that is definitely because of video games.
Yeah. Another study that showed that sort of seek to see differences between gamers and non-gamers showed that the beneficial effects actually may vary between video game types. So there's a lot of different genres. There's FPS, which will sort of have more effect on, as you said, the cognitive perception ability. There are other forms of video games that may affect areas like sustained attention, selective attention, and those aspects as well. So like the media and the genre of games you are exposed to can also be a facet in what sort of superpowers you're developing.
Dude, yeah, for sure. Like there was also this study that looked at role-playing games, RPGs, and pro-social behavior, and there seemed to be a improvement in pro-social behavior. People tended to act more pro-socially when they played role-playing games that had to do with them helping a villager or something, like Skyrim, like you help out the villager and that sort of thing. They kind of emulated, which is actually kind of similar to that stylistic modeling thing I was talking about. So it's not just for aggression but for a lot of other things. So it's almost like you are in that world of video games, and you actually learn a lot, and then you kind of like come out of it, and you retain it. It's like Ready Player One.
Yeah, you retain it, and you're a changed person when you come out of that world. You don't just leave everything you learned over there. It actually transfers to real world possibilities.
That's why I can 360 no scope from the roof
in real life. Yeah.
Well, I think video games are great. Personally, they've helped me through some difficult times, and some not so difficult times have been more interesting because of video games.
Yeah, definitely. And like the pandemic especially comes through as a shining example of that.
Yeah.
Which is very topical and very convenient for this podcast.
We're just we're taking advantage of the pandemic.
Oh no. I think this is the cue for us to wrap up the first episode of the Mind Theory podcast. We've been rambling for a while now.
Yeah.
If you've listened this far, we hope you all enjoyed, and
we'll see you
again.
Stay
tuned for the next episode. This is Avinash
and this is Akanksh signing off for now.
We'll see you.
Bye-bye.